Today, we are diving into an epic from medieval Bengal, and it's all about gods, mortals, and that messy, complicated, and, well, all too human space where they collide.
I mean, just think about that for a second. How can something be both a source of life and a bringer of death? This quote just perfectly captures this amazing paradox that's really at the heart of our story. The great goddesses in this tradition, you see, they're not simple one-dimensional figures. They embody these really fundamental and often kind of terrifying contradictions of existence itself.
And that leads us right to our central character, the snake goddess, Manasa. I mean, look at her. She is a figure of immense power, surrounded by the very creatures that give her dominion. But who is she really? And what does her ferocious battle with one incredibly stubborn mortal tell us about the nature of gods, and maybe even about ourselves?
So, to really get a handle on Manasa, we first have to explore this dual nature that defines not just her, but a lot of goddesses of her kind.
Just look at these stark opposites here. These goddesses are divinities of fertility and birth, but at the same time, of destruction and death. You know, take the goddess Kali, for instance. She's often called gentle and benevolent, even as she wears a necklace of human skulls and presides over a cult that's been described as one of the bloodiest in all of Asia. Manasa is absolutely cut from the same cloth, a powerful, life-giving force who is also terrifyingly destructive when she's provoked.
And oh, does she get provoked. This brings us to the absolute core conflict of this entire epic, a really bitter feud between an ambitious goddess and one unmovable mortal man.
So on one side, you've got Manasa. She's a rising deity, and like any new power, she needs followers to really cement her status. She's desperate for worship. And on the other side, we have Chando. He's this rich, powerful merchant, and he is just unshakably devoted to the great god Shiva. He absolutely refuses to worship this new upstart goddess. This is the setup for a truly epic showdown.
So, when Chando rejects her, you can probably guess Manasa does not take it lightly. Her insecurity and her ambition just curdle into this terrifying vengeance. She decides she's going to make an example of him, to prove to the whole world that she is a goddess who cannot and will not be ignored.
And her first act is just devastatingly cruel. She sends her snakes to kill Chando's sons, and not all at once, but one by one. She takes 6 of them. It's the slow, methodical display of her deadly power.
But she doesn't stop there. Not even close. She then turns her wrath on his livelihood, sinking his merchant ships, wiping out the source of his immense wealth and power in the mortal world. She is systematically dismantling his entire life, piece by piece.
And this is where the story becomes truly incredible. After losing 6 sons and his entire fortune, Chando still refuses to worship her. His defiance is just absolute, almost superhuman. Here he is, a solitary mortal standing firm against the relentless wrath of a god.
Chando's incredible defiance sets the stage for the story's emotional climax, but it's not actually his journey we're going to follow. No, it's the quest of his daughter-in-law, a woman named Bahula.
The ultimate tragedy strikes. Chando arranges a marriage for his 7th and final son, Lakhandar. And despite building a literal iron chamber to protect him, Manasa sends a tiny snake to bite and kill him on his wedding night. With that, Chando has lost everything. But Lakhandar's new bride, Bahula, she refuses to accept this fate. Okay, so to understand what happens next, we have to talk about this crucial ancient belief. You see, victims of snake bites weren't cremated. It was believed the venom somehow preserved the body, that the person was in a kind of suspended state. So their body would be floated down a river, in this desperate hope that a powerful healer, or maybe even a deity, might find them and bring them back to life. And that belief, that's the key. Bahula, in this incredible act of love and devotion, refuses to let her husband's body be just abandoned to the river. She builds a raft, places his corpse on it, and gets on it with him, floating down the river on this perilous odyssey to the realm of the gods themselves to plead for his life.
The whole story just feels so incredibly raw and human, right? Well, there's a really good reason for that. And to understand why, we need to look at the tradition that it actually comes from.
This epic is part of a genre called Mangal Kavya. Now, you can almost think of them as commercials for local gods. Seriously, these weren't just stories for entertainment. They were devotional poems designed to establish the cults of deities just like Manasa. The message was really simple and direct. Worship this god, and you will be rewarded. Ignore them, and you will suffer badly.
But what's so fascinating here is that there isn't one single official version of the story. The epic is what one scholar called a multichromatic collage. It's not a book written by a single author, but a story that has been told and reshaped for centuries.
Get this, the story was passed down orally for thousands of years before the very first written version we have showed up in 1495. Since then, dozens of writers have created their own versions and many variations are still performed today. So why does this matter? It means the story isn't some static relic, it's a mirror reflecting the society that tells it. Storytellers added things, they took things away, they borrowed details, they basically superimposed their own experiences, their own local color, their own anxieties and hopes onto this ancient narrative. The story is a living, breathing thing.
And all of this brings us to our final and maybe most important point. The characters in this epic, especially the gods, are so deeply and so flawedly human. Look at this contrast. On the one hand, you have the remote, perfect, epic gods you'd find in sophisticated court poetry. But on the other, you have the folksy, earthy style of the Mongol Kavya. See, these gods weren't meant to be distant and unknowable. They were meant to be relatable.
The term for this is anthropomorphic, which is really just a fancy way of saying human-like. These gods were designed for the entertainment and the understanding of ordinary, often illiterate people. Farmers, artisans, laborers. They were given human forms and, more importantly, human personalities and human problems.
And this just illustrates the point perfectly. Shiva, he's not some great ascetic meditating on a mountaintop. In these stories, he's portrayed as a hard-working farmer who can be overcome by lust and liquor. And Manasa isn't just a symbol of divine power, she's driven by a very human insecurity and a real thirst for vengeance. And Chando's heroism is completely inseparable from his pig-headed stubbornness. They are, as one source beautifully puts it, essentially fragile, though they appear formidable.
So, the reason this epic has survived for centuries is because it's not really about gods at all. It uses the gods to tell a story about us. It's a story about human stubbornness in the face of suffering, about the incredible power of love and devotion, and about the resilience it takes to stand up and say no, even to a god.
And that leaves us with a final question to think about. What does it change when the gods in our stories aren't perfect, untouchable beings, but are instead mirrors of our own complex, contradictory, and fragile humanity? What do we end up learning about ourselves?